George back here in my project Daytona. I'm out here getting the cylinders honed in preparation of putting the pistons back in. I've got a flex hone on a cordless drill. Just taking that and you use a little bit of WD-40 on it and just run it up and down. You're looking for about a 30-degree crosshatch. That's ideal. I'm going to get the rings put on the pistons here in a minute. After I get this done, I'm going to clean up the surface for the head to go back on later too, while I've got everything apart so I don't get crud down in the new bores later. So I will be right back. Alright guys, so hopefully that shows up on the camera there that I got a nice good hatch going on in my cylinders. Kind of dim the light a little bit there. So I've got all 4 of them done. There were some issues with a couple of them. I don't know if you can see me. Point this kind of down in there. Maybe this one will show up better. But I've got a couple of marks. I don't know, you really can't see that are actually bad enough to where really and truly this probably should have a hone on it, or a bore done on it, an overbore. But that means buying like brand new replacement overbore pistons, and ain't nobody got time for that. So I'm going to go ahead and get the block cleaned up, the head mating service cleaned up, then we'll move on to getting the rings on the pistons. Okay, so I've got my piston in a vise here. This little dot, that denotes that goes toward the front of the engine, which is the passenger side. So basically the front of the block. The way the pistons works, when you open the box, it comes in a little plastic packet, and you can't really see the numbers there, sort of. But there's 1, 2, and 3. So you have your top, your center, and then your expander and oil rings. The way this works is you take your stainless steel wave ring here. That goes into the bottom groove. Then these 2 smaller steel rings go on the top and bottom of that. They're super thin. Then this goes in your center groove, and then this goes in your top groove. This particular brand uses a little bit of white paint to denote just in case they get lost. There's also a dot focus right there as it comes in and out of focus. That denotes that that's the top, so that has to face up. Then when I put these on, I'm going to actually point them a certain way to make sure that these grooves that are going to be left, the gaps there, don't actually line up. And I'll show you that when I get it done. I can't hold a camera and do it both. Unfortunately, don't have a better rig for that. But I'm going to get this one done, and then I'll show you what I'm talking about with the gaps. Okay, so I got the bottom one in. This is the second ring there. And what I've done is I've just got the 2 gaps there, and if you can't see it, somewhere in there, right there's a little bit of yellow paint. That's the end of the actual expander part. So you want to just have it lined up with the 2 oil rings on the gaps on either side of that. Then this is going to actually point kind of toward the front at an angle, probably about like that. I'm actually going to use these pliers for that. These you can just kind of roll into the groove, but on these there's such a thicker steel ring, there's a possibility you could warp it and it could cause some weird issues. These are cheap. They're like $8, and it just saves you the hassle there, possibly bending, or if you try to roll this in there and you bend it too tightly, you break it. So I'm just going to use this method again. My dots face up on these, so this is going to be my second ring, and I will be right back. I got that one in. That gap is right here. So I don't know the exact rule of thumb, but what I'm doing is basically taking the wrist pin lines up with the way the block sits in the car. So I'm taking an imaginary line down the middle, and then I'm just kind of putting it at a 45-degree angle. So in between that and what would be the perpendicular mark for this one. And then when I do the top one, it'll be over here. And here it is all done. So as you can see there, I've got it just kind of on the other side of that center line that would kind of line up with the skirt there. So I'm going to go ahead and get the other two done. Then we're going to go ahead and pop one of these in, but that's going to be it for this video. It's getting kind of late, but I do want to at least get one of them in so I can show you what the process is there. So of course I broke a ring when I got to the last piston. So I'm going to end it there. I've got everything ready to go though, so as soon as I get a replacement for that and get the pistons ready to go in, I can get all that done. That'll be in the next video. It's been a very long week. Christmas is coming up this weekend. Okay, so it's been about a week since the last clip where I broke a piston ring trying to do the last cylinder. I'd honed all this stuff out and also went ahead and prepped the surface of the deck. Problem I had is we had a very warm, like 60-degree day with a lot of humidity that actually come in. You probably can't see it on camera, but there's a lot of surface rust on the deck now. I had oiled down the cylinders because I knew I was going to be leaving it, so they're okay for the most part, but there's a couple of spots where I guess I didn't get enough oil on them. So I'm going to have to hit these with the hone again real quick. I'm going to go ahead and put the pistons in and then wait on the deck surface because it might be another week before I actually get a head on this thing. So I'm going to do that now, and I will be back in a second and we will get the pistons put into the blocks. Okay, so I'm getting ready to put the first piston in. I'm going to show you this one on camera. So this is my ring compressor. It's not one of the cheap band ones. This is actually from Summit. You find one that matches your bore. You adjust this to where it just slightly fits over the piston with the thicker end. This is basically tapered on the inside. So when I put this over the bore, put a good coating of oil in the cylinder, in the cone, and on the side of the piston, and then I can slide this down and I just boop it, tightens everything up as it tapers down, and I don't have to worry about the band type compressors, and I've had like 3 or 4 of them and they all fly apart and it gets kind of messy. So this is worth the investment to just buy one of these, especially if you're going to do this. It's like the 3rd time I've used this thing, which doesn't sound like a lot, but if you're doing that many engines, you're not good at tuning, which I'm not, but that's another point for another day. So I'm going to go ahead and do this one real quick on camera. So we're going to take, this is number 1. One thing to remember, if you have rod bolts that stick out of the bottom of the piston, you need to put something over the end of the rod bolts, because if they nick the journal of the crank, these bolts are harder than that metal. You'll actually scratch that and it will cause a loss of oil pressure. So these are just little plastic vacuum caps. That way when it slides down in there, I don't have to worry about this rod bolt bumping the crank. Once I get all 4 of them slid in there, I'll flip the engine over, kind of get them all wiggled into place on the crank. Again too, you'll want to make sure that you keep the rings with the gaps the right way. You want them to sit kind of slightly off from each other. So, you know, double check that, give everything a good coat of oil, and then you just push it right in. Do that. Take just some motor oil. Drop the cap. Generous handful of that on the rag. So, rub that down in the cylinder. Then slide that over. We'll go ahead and just coat that up too. We're not going like dumping oil in this. We just want to film on everything. But then what I will do is on the skirt underneath this 3rd ring, you can be kind of generous with the oil, as I totally get it in the wrong area. Just let it drip around. If you do what I did, pour it in the wrong place, it's not the end of the world, but it will cause some issues there. So we're going to double check our gaps again. There. There's a dot on here. That is the front of the engine. So we will slide this in. then I'll have to gear. Boom, there she is. So I'm going to go ahead and get all these in, get it rotated over so I can get all the caps on the crank with the new rod bearings in, and we will be right back. Okay, so I'm actually just going to go ahead and do number one while I've got everything here ready to go. I'm not going to torque it down just yet, but I'm going to get it tight to a point. So what I went ahead and did was prep the bearings, the new rod bearings. I got the one in the piston already. You want to make sure you have a very clean and dry surface before you put the bearing in, because if anything gets between the bearing and the cap or the rod or whatever, then it will spin inside here, and that's a spun rod bearing, which is bad. So I've cleaned and dried both sides, got both bearings pressed in, and what I'm going to do now is put a thin film of engine assembly lube on both sides. And that's going to give this lubrication up to the point the engine builds oil pressure. And it is very thick and goopy. We're just going to, again, not too heavy. We're just putting a thin film here. So I'm going to do that on both sides. Pull the caps off, line the rod up to the journal, and then just get it in there, put the cap on. I marked all these when I pulled them out. You won't be able to see this, but I put a 1 on number 1 on both sides that match up, but it also happens to be on this engine the sides that the little tangs for the bearing retainment. This is supposed to keep it from spinning, so you know I know which way it lines up. It's got to go in a certain way because we're not doing any machine work here. So I'm going to get these in, go ahead again, get all 4 done. I'll be back in a second. Okay, so I got everything together. All 4 pistons are in. Went ahead and torqued all the rod bolts. Didn't record that. Kind of had a couple things come up in between the last clip and this one. So now I'm going to move on to going ahead and trying to figure out how to get the turbo on the head. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use the stock cast iron manifold. And as I said before, Chrysler used a weird flange that's kind of a weird, it's not a T3, it's not a T4, it doesn't match up to anything but Chrysler. So what I'm going to end up doing is getting rid of these old studs and re-drilling this cast iron for the T3 pattern. The hole in the middle is the same, it's just the bolt hole locations, and none of the bolt holes line up to a regular T3 flange. So all 4 of them have to come out. What I may end up having to do is actually cut the studs off flush and then go through and clean this up with a sander or something to try to keep this decked flat so I don't have any issues with sealing. But I'll drill this out, then I'll be able to take a head, mock it up with the intake, make sure that everything's going to clear with the new turbo. I don't see any reason why it shouldn't, but we'll find out. So I'm going to get to modifying this. Okay, so I started modifying this. I ended up just cutting the studs off. I had a gasket that came with one of the turbo rebuild kits that I've had in recent history. Oh man, it's like freezing out here. So I matched this up, made sure it matched up with the turbo, then used it as a guideline for where to mark my holes. I'm going to start drilling these, but I won't actually show you that until the next video because I don't have the tap to tap this out to bolt the new turbo to it. So in the next video, what we should hopefully have going is getting this back in the car. I have to get a new oil pump pickup because there's a dent in the pan that also dented the pickup. So I'm going to get a new pickup and then just beat the dent out of the pan. I'll have this drilled out, so I should be able to start doing a mock-up of the top end, get the oil pan back on, get this back in the car. Then when the top end is mocked up, it can go in here, make sure it's going to clear everything else, because I'm really kind of flying by the seat of my pants here. So I'm going to keep working on this. You'll see that in the next video, but I'm going to leave it off here. Again, thanks to everyone so far who's watched the videos, liked them, subscribed to the channel. I want to keep that going. I want to try to do a video every week in 2017. This will be the first one of those because this will be out after the new year. Today's New Year's Eve. So just stay with me. I plan on making plenty of content for next year and seeing where this goes. Again, thanks. Have a happy new year, and I will see you next week.